Okay. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. We are very delighted to start this webinar and delighted that so many people have registered and joined us. Just trying to check that people are able to see. So welcome to this webinar co-hosted by End Corporal Punishment, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and Save the Children, which focuses on successful norms and behaviour change strategies to end corporal punishment of children in society. Sonia Vejito and I will be your hosts today. And this event is taking place in the context of marking the International Day to End Corporal Punishment, which is actually tomorrow, the 30th of April. And I hope everyone will join us in amplifying the issue and calling for accelerated action to end violent punishment of children. Today, during 1.5 hours, we'll have the opportunity to learn more about strategies to reduce social acceptance and use of corporal punishment, both at scale and in specific contexts and locations.
And as you may have seen in the webinar program, we will hear about national experiences to end violence against children, especially corporal punishment, and related strategies to change social norms and behavior. We will have examples from Uganda, Wales, and Zambia. We will also hear about the role of laws prohibiting corporal punishment of children in changing norms and behavior. So we'll have time for discussion as well. And feel free to use the chat box to ask questions. We will try and answer your question during the webinar. So we will now start to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Etienne Krug from the WHO, the Director for the Department of Social Determinants of Health. Dr. Etienne Krug will talk to us about the public health imperative to end corporal punishment of children. Etienne, over to you. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sonia and Bess. Good day, colleagues. Nice to have so many of you joining us for this discussion on ending corporal punishment, which is so timely. A few days ago, I was scrolling on TikTok and I came across this TikTok of a guy basically explaining why he was out of date. He was out of date because he was born before internet existed, before mobile phones existed, etc. And one of the elements he cited to show he was out of date was that he came from a time where corporal punishment existed and was even promoted as a mean to raise children. So this is exactly something we want to see happen all over the world. Corporal punishment has traditionally been seen as an entirely normal and even a necessary part of raising children. And this is why today we still have over 1 billion children experiencing it in almost all countries. Nearly all children report regularly suffering from violent punishment at home and at school. So there's still a long way to go, unfortunately. And we only have 6 years to go, in fact, because we and the entire world promised to children to end all forms of violence against children, including corporal punishment by 2030. So 6 years to go. We need to accelerate progress to fulfill the commitment we have made to our children in target 16.2 of the SDGs. A lot of research has shown that corporal punishment has a very negative impact on children in terms of their health, mental health. It leads to anxiety, insomnia, depression, a number of very negative health impacts, as well as physical health, of course, with the extreme forms of death, but also injuries and the fact that children who've been affected by it pick up all kinds of negative habits such as smoking, alcohol abuse, etc. It also has a very negative impact on their schooling and their results at schools, etc., etc. And it should not be like that. We know that 65 countries have already banned it, both at home and at school by law. We know that they've managed to change norms around it. And this is exactly what today we want to be discussing and learn from. How do those countries manage to ban it? How do they adopt the right legislation and manage to change what is a very ingrained cultural habit in many, many countries still? So I very much look forward to the discussion, particularly since we're only 7 months away or so from the first ever global ministerial conference on violence against children, which will happen in November in Bogota, Colombia, where this will be one of the topics discussed, and where we'll try to make the argument for more countries to adopt the right legislation sooner rather than later. So a big thanks to Bess and Sonia for organizing the event and the Corporal Punishment Group, as well as, of course, our colleagues in UNICEF, Save the Children, and to our speakers today. So thanks to all and welcome. Looking forward to the discussions. Over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Etienne, for getting us started and reminding us of our commitments, that we've already made commitments to end corporal punishment of children, and the kind of pressing public health case for it. I'm really pleased now to introduce Stephen Blight, Global Head of the UNICEF Violence Against Children Unit, and he will talk to us about UNICEF's strategic approach to ending corporal punishment of children. Over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Bess, and hi, colleagues. We're really delighted that we have the opportunity to co-host today's webinar and to be joined by such a diverse group of people. Because as we'll discuss today, it's this breadth of actors and actions in the system that's so needed to end corporal punishment. And in terms of UNICEF's contribution, I just wanted to highlight 3 priority areas. Firstly, on the legislative front, UNICEF supports state parties to implement the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And this includes the domestication of its provisions and the alignment of national laws with international child rights standards. And we've learned that prohibition of corporal punishment is best addressed as part of a comprehensive reform of a country's legislative framework on child rights. So just over the last few years, for example, UNICEF provided technical and financial support to legislative reform processes in such countries as Lao PDR, in Guinea, in Zambia, amongst others, that have resulted in the achievement of corporal punishment. In coordination with End Corporal Punishment, we monitor laws related to corporal punishment in all of our program countries and work with partners to advocate for change where forms of violence against children remain condoned in law. Because we know that when it's condoned in law, it sends a signal to society that it's okay. Secondly, as part of the 2030 agenda, UNICEF strongly advocated for the inclusion of data on violent discipline as part of the measurement framework for SDG 16.2, ending all forms of violence against children. And it's remarkable now that violent discipline is integrated in the SDG architecture, and the elimination of violent discipline is now universally recognized. It's recognized by all governments as a global public policy priority. Now, we're a custodian of this indicator, so we work with national statistical offices on the development, standardization, and coordination of data related to this indicator. And there's now internationally comparable data about violent discipline of children from some 92 countries. Thirdly, we recognize the limits of legislative and political approaches. So we invest in social and behavioral change interventions to promote abandonment of violent disciplinary practices. Last year, for example, UNICEF supported parenting programs. These are programs that build parent skills to use positive disciplinary practices, reached some 12 million families in 81 countries. For teachers, evaluations of training programs on positive discipline and classroom management have shown their effectiveness in reducing corporal punishment in schools. So these are now being integrated into training for teachers in such countries as Cambodia, Indonesia, and Jordan. Complementing and permeating these initiatives is our work with communities to promote children's voice, provide platforms for advocacy, and stimulate discussion that challenges the harmful norms that so often condone violence against children, even where legal prohibition is not yet being achieved. So colleagues, I think we're reaching a tipping point where corporal punishment of children is no longer socially acceptable, and we look forward to its widespread abandonment. And we welcome the opportunity to share learning on effective strategies and anticipate an engaging discussion today. Thanks very much. Back to you, Bess.
Thank you, Stephen, for explaining UNICEF priority areas towards ending corporal punishment of children in all settings. We're now going to have our next speaker, Mr. Ramadan Bob Kirunda from the Impact and Innovation Development Center in Uganda. So yes, Bob is going to tell us about the Ugandan experience in changing social norms and behavioral strategies. So Bob, I don't know if you're ready. You have a presentation, so you can go ahead. The floor is yours. You can't hear anything.
Thank you so much. I was mute. I'm going to share a little bit about social norms and behavior change strategies, giving examples and learnings from the Ugandan experience, where IIDC, we are supporting some partners who are working in the violence prevention area to design normative change interventions and also support them along the implementation periods. So social norms are not something new. We really know what most people know what social norms are. And they are unwritten rules, that govern human behavior. And that is a known factor. And many implementers organizations understand what social norms are. But the real problem is really not the understanding of norms, but the how to change the norms. Yeah. And I'm going to be sharing a little bit about some practical strategies of changing norms. We have two types of norms, descriptive and injunctive. The descriptive norms, these are perceptions of what others do. Yeah. When you see many people do things, when you see many parents beating, you also start beating. So you are normatively influenced, but that type of norm is a descriptive norm. While an injunctive norm is you are expected to be beating, and if you do not beat, then you do not belong. Then you are moving away from the normal practice, the normal way how behavior is expected at the community level. But we need to differentiate between these norms and attitudes. Yeah. Why norms are important and why programming for norms is important is that people's attitudes towards norms, especially when they get information and knowledge, is positive. So someone may be positive and they want to, to discipline using positive means, but because of the social norms, they end up beating their children. And these are examples from Uganda. For example, among many parents in one of the norms studies that we did with the TPO in northern Uganda, many parents, beating is accepted and approved as long as it doesn't cause physical bodily damage. Now, that is their definition of positive disciplining, that if it doesn't cause physical damage, then it is fine. Yeah. And they forget the entire aspect, like Dr. Etienne was talking about, the other effects of this corporal punishment on the children. We also know that they are passed on and enforced by behavior reference groups. These are people who matter, yeah? And therefore, what should interventions look like? How do you define a normative change intervention, yeah? And we have a definition here that can help us to really have a kind of a pointed and very intentional definition, that an intervention is one which seeks to change the behavior of a target population by exposing them to values, normative beliefs, and behaviors of the reference group. What does this mean? That interventions that seek to change norms must expose the reference groups, the people who are promoting or perpetuating the norms, to expose them to positive behavior and therefore be able to change their behavior and also change their influence. So the expectation of the people they influence also changes. Yeah. For example, if I'm a teacher, yeah, and if my director of studies or if my head teacher says beating is not allowed in this school and he's my influencer, you can be sure that when I go into class, I'll say, now I will not beat because I'm not expected to beat. That is how we should look at it. Therefore, the actual person to target when you're changing norms are the reference group participants and the influencers, and not the primary population may shift from becoming the people who are victims or people who are beaten to the current perpetrators. That is very important to note. This is just an explanation of that these norms come with sanctions. For example, if I'm in a school and I don't beat, maybe I will not be promoted. So even when I don't want to beat, but I want the promotion, then I will beat. Or if my colleagues will belittle me, then I will be forced to actually beat. So how do we change these behaviors? There are three strategies, normative behavior strategies. And this is also speaking from our experience, the moving away from the normal behavior change communication to normative behavior change strategies. The communication, the strategies must be normative in nature, yeah? And one of the first one is community-informed normative change messaging. That the messaging, from our experience, has to be normative in nature, co-developed by the communities, speaking to the actual behavior. The second strategy that we've been using is capacity sharing and enhancement, because now the implementer is changing from the organizations, the community-based organizations, the CBOs, to the change agent, the one who influences the behavior. Therefore, they need capacity. So the other way is to target them, capacitate the change agents to be able to influence the positive behavior. And thirdly, deliberation and reflection. This, again, is led by the community change agents. So the normative change, the behavior change to happen, these must be very critical and at the center of implementation. And what you see there, as expected, I correct and discipline my children through dialogue and conversation, is a message as opposed to saying don't beat. Yeah. So the messaging becomes more normative and pointed. These are the additional behavior change tools and pathways. You can use create new norms and reference groups. For example, a group of teachers who don't beat their students, and therefore others are encouraged not to beat and become part of that group of teachers. Of course, work with trendsetters or positive deviants. Yeah, people who go against the norm, yeah, identify them and engage them. And these can actually become your role models, yeah. Organized diffusion, norms marketing, regulations that we talked about earlier, the previous presenter. For example, Uganda prohibited corporal punishment in the Constitution, but also in the Penal Code Act. But the implementation requires going beyond the law to engaging the social actors to really achieve full behavior change. public commitments and declarations. Yeah, these are some of the other tools alongside the 3 behavior change interventions that are critical in changing norms. And across all this spectrum of approaches, tools, and pathways, deliberation and reflection at the individual, family, and community level is important, so that the change is multi-level. If the change is at maybe at the family level, the family is influenced by the community and maybe by the broader society. So this communication and deliberation must be at all levels, and so should interventions and programs. What have we learned? One, that agency is very key, a key factor to norms change. Without it, there is susceptibility to conformance to the norm. Secondly, is that people update their injunctive norms and beliefs after receiving descriptive information. So we can use descriptive norms positively to affect the injunctive norms. So, and I'm giving an example there. When parents who beat get to know that, a few of the parents beat in their village, then they are likely to adjust their expectations. And therefore, a positive injunctive norm starts to develop. They start to question the norm around beating, changing negative behaviors. Very importantly, a place of evidence and emotion. Yeah, we sometimes forget that people behave or react, yeah, based on their emotions. So if we want to make behavior change happen, especially at the individual level, emotion is very important to generate a response and connection with agency. And of course, ensuring that we embed a norms accountability angle. Things that haven't worked as much, that need a little bit of further study, as I conclude: light infusion and integration. Some interventions, even when we know that the norms are the root cause, they still focus on the other factors, like measuring on other factors, maybe of a school's program or of a parenting program, and making the social norms to be secondary. Yet when you do an analysis, they are the root causes. So there's need to invert how we look at these problems. Fragmented implementation, we need to look, at the whole socio-ecological model and, apply a systems approach. And very importantly, learning from the communities. When you learn what they think, then you are able to know where to target. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karinda. That was fantastic. Are there any pressing questions now for Karinda about his presentation and the kind of multiple strategies that you need to change social norms and behaviours? Or should we move on to the next speaker, to Joan Durant, and then we can take questions together maybe? I can't see anyone with their hand up, so maybe we should move on, Sonia.
Yeah, so our next speaker is going to be Professor Joan Durant from the University of Manitoba in Canada. She's also the Executive Director of Positive Discipline in Everyday Life. So Joan will be talking to us about the role of laws in changing norms and behavior. I believe we'll have examples from Sweden, Germany, and New Zealand, and maybe other countries. So Joan, over to you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Sonia. And greetings, everyone. I'm speaking to you from the land known as Canada, and from the city of Winnipeg, which is located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Cree, Dakota, Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. I will just share my screen here. So, as Dr. Krug mentioned, as of today, 65 countries have prohibited all corporal punishment of children. And they are in almost all continents of the world, all but North America. 11 are in Central America and South America. 35 are in Europe. 1 is in the Middle East. 12 are in Africa. And 6 are in the Asia Pacific region. objectives of these laws are, first, to comply with the UNCRC and other human rights instruments. 2, to be proactive and preventive rather than reactive and punitive after a child has been hurt. And 3, to raise awareness and shift the attitudes and norms that we've just been hearing about. Because not only is legislation a legal tool, it's also a very powerful educational tool. Sweden was the first to pass such a law, and they did that in 1979. The Swedish law says children are entitled to care, security, and a good upbringing. Children are to be treated with respect for their person and individuality and may not be subjected to physical punishment or other injurious or humiliating treatment. So clearly this law was based on children's rights to protection and dignity. And it was the first law to define corporal punishment as a humiliation. The Swedish law was accompanied by a public education campaign. Part of this campaign was information that was printed on milk cartons for 2 months to promote discussion among parents and children at mealtimes. The girl in the drawing is saying, "Never in my life will I hit my children." Now I'm going to show you some outcomes from Sweden, which is one country that has done very systematic research over the decades to track attitudes and behavior. So this graph is going to show you the percentage of adults who believe that corporal punishment is necessary in raising children. In 1965, about half the population believed that corporal punishment is necessary. By 1981, that proportion had decreased by half, and by 2009, it had reached 0. By 2011, 92% of adults believed that it's wrong to hit or slap a child, even if the child had made the parent very angry. This graph will show the percent of parents who reported hitting their children in the previous year. 1 year after the law was passed, about a quarter of parents reported hitting their children. By 2000, that proportion had been reduced virtually to 0, and it has stayed at that extremely low level. Now I'm going to turn to Germany, which is another country that has collected a lot of outcome data. This law was passed in 2000, and it reads, "Children have a right to a nonviolent upbringing. Physical punishments, psychological injuries, and other degrading measures are inadmissible." So once again, a rights-based law that acknowledges the degradation inherent in corporal punishment. The passage of Germany's law was accompanied by a year-long multimedia campaign called More Respect for Children, which aimed to raise awareness of the law and provide information about alternative approaches to challenging child-rearing situations. Now let's look at some data. This graph is going to show the percentage of parents who agreed with these 2 statements about smacking in 1992 and in 2001. So the proportion of parents who slaps make children see reason decreased over that decade. And the proportion who believe that smacking teaches children to accept violence increased. Now you might be noticing that the data in 2001 were collected very soon after the prohibition. And this raises an important point, which is that it's not only the actual passage of the law that contributes to attitude change. There's usually a lot of public discussion that precedes it, and that has a very important awareness raising and educational function. As previously normalized behavior becomes reframed as harmful and unacceptable. Over the decade that preceded Germany's prohibition, there was a great deal of public debate which contributed to these attitude shifts. This graph shows the percentage of youth who had ever experienced these different forms of corporal punishment. So between 1992 and 2002, there were substantial declines in the proportion of youth who had experienced light slaps across the face, hard slaps across the face, being hit on the bottom with an object, and being hit to the point of bruising. And remember that these are youth self-report. These are not parents reporting what they did. These are youth reporting their experiences. Now I'm going to turn to New Zealand. In 2007, the criminal defense for corporal punishment was repealed. A statement was added to the Crimes Act that nothing in the Act or in any rule of common law justifies the use of force for the purpose of correction. And at that time, the Ministry of Social Development had begun to implement a universal support program for parents of young children called SKIP. Now, this graph is going to show the percentage of adults who agreed that there are certain circumstances when it's all right for a parent to physically punish a child. In 1993, a large majority of adults agreed with that statement. So it was a very normative attitude. By 2013, that proportion had decreased by more than half. And those of you who know the New Zealand story will know that there was tremendous public debate about the law change there that really served to raise awareness and shift attitudes. This graph shows the proportion of parents who physically punished their children in the previous 4 weeks. So at the time the law was changed in 2007, about 10% reported having done so. That proportion decreased by almost half over the 10 years following the ban's passage. Now, I have mentioned that these countries did have public education campaigns along with their law reforms. So some of you might be wondering whether it's the law or the public education that make the bigger difference. And wouldn't you know, a team of German researchers conducted a 5-country study to try to tease out these effects. So they examined attitudes and behavior in Sweden, Germany, Austria, Spain, and France. And these countries were selected because they represented sort of different conditions as we would do an experimental study, but of course you can't randomly assign people to live in countries. So they did kind of a quasi-experimental study. At the time of the study, Sweden, Germany, and Austria had prohibited all corporal punishment, but Spain and France had not yet done so. They have done so since, but in 2007 they had not. Sweden and Germany had conducted public education campaigns along with their law reforms, but Austria had not. Spain had been doing public education since 1998 to raise awareness and shift norms, but had not yet prohibited corporal punishment. And France had done neither. So the 5 countries represented 4 conditions. Germany and Sweden had both prohibited corporal punishment and implemented public education. Austria had prohibited, but had not implemented public education. Spain had implemented public education, but had not yet prohibited, and France had done neither. So the busman and his colleagues conducted standardized face-to-face interviews of 1,000 parents in each country. So you can imagine they collected a huge amount of data, and here I'm just going to present one of their findings because it's so striking, but please know that all of their findings followed the same trend as what I'm about to show you. So this graph will show you the percentage of parents living in these countries who in 2007 reported using physical punishment. Parents living in those countries with prohibition and public education were very unlikely to use corporal punishment. Parents living in a country with prohibition, but no public education, were somewhat more likely to use corporal punishment. But parents living in a country with public education, but no prohibition, were much more likely to use corporal punishment. And those living in a country with neither prohibition nor public education were very likely to use corporal punishment. So you can see how striking this pattern is, and this was quite consistent across attitudes and beliefs about what constitutes violence and all kinds of measures that were used. What seems to be the case is that the most effective way of shifting behavior is to have a combination of prohibition and public education. We know that behavior is driven by attitudes that reflect social norms. So in order to change attitudes and behavior, we must target both attitudes and behavior. To shift attitudes, we need to delegitimate corporal punishment in the public mind, to redefine it as violence, and set a clear standard in law that no child may be hurt in the name of discipline. And we need to provide information and support to explain why this change is taking place and to help parents reach the goal of nonviolent parenting. If public messaging and legal standards are not consistent, the impact of each will be greatly reduced. I'm going to end by showing you an example of law reform and public education in action. This is a 60-second ad to raise awareness of the Welsh prohibition, which came into effect in March 2022. It's called The Sound of Change. Oops. Thank you very much for your attention. Look forward to the rest of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Joan. Are you able to stop sharing your screen? There we go. Excellent. Thank you. Just wonderful to hear all of that information. Over to you, Sonia.
Well, maybe we go for, are we going for questions or are we going directly to Dan in Nepal?
Does anyone have any? If not, I have a question.
We have a couple of questions. Can we see hands being raised? No question for the time being. Well, we can ask. I think I have a question for Bob, Uganda. I was wondering, June just said that to change attitudes and behavior, research found that we needed a combination of prohibition and public education. So I was wondering if that's the same experience we have in Uganda. We know, for example, that just using the example of the case of corporal punishment, which is not prohibited in homes in Uganda. Do you think it would be easy to expect change of attitude when the law when it is not backed by a prohibiting law? It's just a question to Bob.
Actually, I'm in agreement with them, and even on the ground experience from the partners and implementers and many programs, legislation goes hand in hand with the education awareness and knowledge creation at the community level, because legislation works as a sanction. Yeah, legislation can play the role of a sanction and helps parents to know that there is a consequence. Yeah. So and that kind of triggers them to behave differently. Although the other negative experience that we had was that they sometimes now start actually punishing in different ways. So I cannot beat the child, so let me deprive the child. Yeah, because the law is going to catch me. So kind of moving from one form of violence and triggering or increasing the other type of violence. So, but all these have to go hand in hand. Not one strategy can really address these problems fairly.
Thank you. Thank you. We have Debbie. We have a question for Debbie. From Debbie.
Oh, so sorry. This is Katongo joining. Challenges joining. Yes. Yeah. For me, I think the question is around ensuring that we actualize the implementation of the laws. Laws might not be very complex to implement. I mean, to put across, but implementation is a challenge. So I just wanted to have an understanding in terms of how are we ensuring that provisions of the law are actually implemented in practice? Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I attempt to respond? From one of the experiences in Western Uganda, which was very successful in implementing the law, because the law is in the constitution, in the book, in the shelf. So how does it go down to the community level? One of the strategies was to use they were called legal outreaches. Yeah, legal outreaches. So the legal people, some lawyers, some judges would be taken to the community level, yeah, to kind of help the communities now to understand what the law is, what it talks about, but also to ensure that if there is anyone at the community level who is part of the scheme to mismanage cases at the community level, they deal with them. So one of the ways is to localize the legislation to community level, yeah, through community systems. So it becomes part of the implementation of community-based programs. There, communities get aware of on what to do. They are aware of their rights. They are aware of what the law says, and significantly, they are able to act on what they know.
Thank you. Joan? Yeah,
just
go ahead.
something? Yes, I totally agree. I think that people need to know about the law itself, and that it's very clear. It's not a gray area. You can hit them under these conditions. You can hit them if they're this old, that kind of thing, which is completely counterproductive. But also, everyone needs to be prepared to say, what do I do instead? That does not involve emotional punishment. So there need to be two things happening at the same time, so that those who are tasked with implementing the law and making sure that people know about it can answer questions in a really helpful, constructive way. I can give you one example, again from Wales, which really invested a lot into the measures that accompanied their prohibition. They put on things like summer road shows where teams would go around to markets and malls and fairgrounds and parks and provide information about the law, so that people were very clear that this had happened, and that's really the most important message. And then they provided resources and links and community-based resources for support, parent support. And so there are a number of things that they've done. Each country has done really interesting and unique things that fit their cultural context and that work for them. Agree that it's very important to raise awareness of the law and provide information about how to raise children in a rights-based way without just substituting other punishments.
Thank you, Joan. Bess, I think you had some questions too.
Well, yeah, if I get my opportunity, this is great. So yeah, just a kind of a question for Joan and Karunda. I was wondering, first of all, do you think the change happens immediately or does it continue over time? And what is kind of debate and disagreement a positive thing, or does it make people kind of entrench in their positions? Just any thoughts about either of those questions and issues?
I'm happy to speak to that, but I'd also want to make sure others have an opportunity. The process that takes place prior to the prohibition generally does raise awareness, especially if there's a lot of, the organizations, the community-based organizations are out there providing information that is not fear-mongering, because that happens. Definitely there are people who will raise fears. Parents will go to jail for putting their children's shoes on. Parents go to jail for, pulling the child out from traffic, which is just absurd. And those derail the debate. So the organizations that are supporting children's rights need to be out front and ensuring that information is clear and accurate. And so that can really help to shift how people think about the law before it's passed. And then, yes, after the law is passed, it becomes actually often it is quite rapid because the redefinition has happened. It's like if we define, you can steal this much, but not that much. Theft is kind of okay. But as soon as we define theft as nothing, you can't steal anything, that starts to become internalized very, very quickly. But certainly there are very powerful intergenerational effects as well.
Really interesting, thank you. Karunda, do you have anything you want to say on either of those topics?
Yeah, I think the change happens quite rapidly in communities that are connected. So it depends on the type of community. If a community is well connected with strong social networks, the change can be rapid. I'm talking about the social change. But where communities are a bit, detached, yeah, then the change takes a little bit of a longer time, because information flow from one person or through one medium to the next, and these discussions and the deliberations require a connected community. So once a community is connected, then the change will happen much more faster as opposed to when it's disconnected.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, looks like there are no other questions. So we tried to check the chat box and there can't see any questions. So we can, shall we move to the next?
Yeah. Okay, so that's been fascinating, kind of talking generally about strategies to change social norms and behaviour. And now we're going to hear 3 examples from different countries of kind of in-depth work to change attitudes, behaviours, acceptance of corporal punishment at scale in these countries. I'm really excited. We're going to have speakers from Nepal, from Wales, that's already mentioned, and from Zambia. And I think we're going to start with Nepal. Yeah. And so I think we are going to hear from Dan Rono, Chief of Child Protection at UNICEF Nepal, talking about implementing UNICEF's strategic approach to ending corporal punishment in Nepal in homes, schools, and communities. Over to you, Dan.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much, Bess. I hope you can all hear me okay. So I'm just going to take you through an example of how Nepal has used parenting programs to reduce corporal punishment. And I will start with a short, just to give you an example of where we're starting from. So Nepal is one of the first countries in South Asia to completely prohibit corporal punishment. But despite that, we realize that almost 82% of all children aged between 1 and 14 have experienced some kind of physical punishment, some kind of aggression. We've also seen about maybe 14% of children who've experienced non-violent discipline as well. We also noticed a trend that significantly influenced our change, which was that children aged between 1 and 9 were the ones that were being punished more violently than the others. And so based on that, we then realized that the only way out of this is to try and reach the parents of these children with more information on corporal punishment, amongst other things. So here we then started, we then came up with a program that allowed several sections to come together. So we have social behavior change, we have education and different and other sections to try and tackle this issue, because we realized that we were not going to achieve SDG 16.2 unless there was a fundamental shift. So by positive parenting, we define it really as to try and promote that parent-child relationship and make it a little bit more nurturing, more empowering, and more importantly, non-violent. We also did realize when we were doing our studies initially, that parents and teachers can really play an important role in reducing physical punishment. And so we then went into a lot more details around this, and we then realized that parents themselves do not even know what a good parent should do. What is positive discipline? What is, they just do not know how exactly to handle the issue of discipline with their children. And we also realized that quite a number of children had been more or less left alone. The number initially when we started was around 600,000, but of course that number has significantly reduced. And we also noticed that the parents were not playing their role as being a parent, because the 35% of the children that we sampled were not developmentally on track, which means they were lacking down. Their schooling was a little bit not on track, and they were missing some important milestones. So with this, then we developed a parenting program. Now the parenting program has several ways that we approach it. So first, we work with parents who have children in school. We also do work with parents in the communities. And we also generally provide a lot more information on what positive parenting is about. And these are some of our results. So these are results from last year. So these numbers have gone up significantly now. But we do have classes for parents. We also do have parent fairs. We use radio programs. We do training of frontline workers, especially the government social workers. And we also created an educational website where parents can access for free and be able to learn quite a bit of information on what positive parenting is all about. We are also very active on social media, and we have now a critical mass of trainers that we have been training for the past 6 or 7 years that have really now gone into the community sharing this message. Now, some of our key achievements, just to show a few, we did a knowledge, attitudes, and practice study, and we then realized that we were actually making a difference. If you look at the caregivers beating children, the numbers are slowly reducing. The practice aspect is reducing. We've seen a 6% change, and that's from our baseline, which was 59%. We're now at 65%. This year, I'm sure we will be way much higher than that. But you will also notice that there's a significant increase in knowledge. Now, the knowledge part seems to be going very, very well, and the attitudes as well. But the practice is not moving as quickly as we were expecting, but still it is a very, very good progress. Now, let me just spend some time to talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we have learned. We have learned that laws alone are not sufficient to reduce corporal punishment. Just working with the presence of a law does not guarantee a reduction. From the example that we have here, we have seen that we have to do a lot more. And different actors target different people, but for UNICEF, we decided to target parents. We also realize that parents can really make a difference in prevention of violent discipline. Parents can really change the needle when it comes to ending corporal punishment. We also noted very importantly that you need the government on your side. You need to work with the government. The government has to endorse what you're trying to do. They need to support what you're trying to do, and that also really does help in changing practices to do with corporal punishment. We also learned that we need multi-sectorial approach. It's not enough for one section or one department to go on this alone. It has to be a lot more holistic, where you're looking at using health services, for example. One of the things that we've done through health services is that we now have mandatory reporting. If a child has been a victim of violence, then that child would be that case would be reported and action will be taken. From the nutrition perspective, we're also looking at how a parent can be more active in preventing stunting and other things. We also noticed that being with the education sector was very, very useful for us, because we're able to access huge numbers of parents through that. And also that dual focus of targeting both schools and communities, we felt was, a very good way of engaging the community as a whole. And another lesson we learned was that parenting programs can also address other harmful practices and can also significantly support school retention, especially parents of teenagers. We still have a problem of early marriage. We were able to still tackle the same issues through the same program. And finally, we do need more evidence. Evidence is really good in making our case, especially for advocacy and getting buy-in from the government and other actors. We found that investing significantly in evidence generation does make a difference. Well, that's it from me. Thank you very much. Back to you, Bess.
Thank you, Dan, for this very interesting presentation about Nepal and the positive parenting program, the clear key achievement and room for improvement, and the lesson learned. Really interesting. I would gladly share this with our network after this webinar. So from now, we go moving to the next speaker, Wales. Actually, we mentioned the Welsh example. Now let's hear from the Welsh government itself. So we have Joanne Stevens. As you know, Wales prohibited corporal punishment in 2020. The law was enacted. It came into force in 2022. So Joanne is going to share some maybe information and feedback about how the law has been implemented. Yeah, so we'll hear about Wales now. Okay, so Joanne, over to you.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you. So Pranam Daupal, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for inviting us to speak about the journey we've been on in Wales as we aim to end the physical punishment of children. So in Wales, we enshrined the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into our domestic law in 2011. And the Convention recognises, of course, that any physical punishment of children is incompatible with their human rights. And this has been central to our approach. In 2016, in our programme for government, we committed to ending the legal defence of reasonable punishment. And in 2018, we consulted on the proposed legislation. And finally, as Sonia said, in 2020, the Children's Wills Act was passed. The overarching aim was to uphold children's rights and provide children and young people with the same legal protection from assault as adults. The passing of the Act brought clarity to parents and those who work with families that no level of physical punishment will be tolerated in Wales. It placed a duty on Welsh ministers to take steps to promote public awareness of the change in the law prior to commencement in 2022. We think this lead-in time has been really important in allowing us to raise awareness and prepare our public services and the Welsh public for the change. Implementation of the Act was a cross-organisational effort with the Police and Crown Prosecution Service, but also our social services and our education and legal sectors. We all recognise that changing norms and behaviours at scale would take a systematic approach, cross-sector collaboration, clear messaging, and importantly, supporting parents by providing information, advice, and guidance. We worked with a group of experts to inform and oversee our communications work, and that helped us to develop a comprehensive awareness raising campaign, including TV, radio, and digital advertising. We also targeted engagement with faith groups, community organisations, and to visitors in Wales. We have a dedicated website that has a range of information sheets and resources for parents and professionals. And we also expanded our Parenting Give It Time campaign to give parents with children from 0 to 18 appropriate tips and expert advice on positive parenting and alternatives to physical punishment. Working with our partners, we reviewed and updated operational processes, guidance and training for frontline professionals and produced information sheets for the different sectors. Another important area of work was with the police and local authorities to develop an out-of-court parenting support scheme. This ensured the change in the law was seen as supporting rather than criminalising parents. The scheme provides an alternative to potential prosecution, taking into account the best interests of the child through multi-agency discussions. And since the law has come into effect, our communication and engagement activity has shifted, and it's now focused on promoting clear understanding of the law and on positive parenting. And this includes our Not Here campaign, which I'd like to play for you now. There may be a slight delay, so if you wouldn't mind giving us a moment.
Not here. Not in this house. Not them. Not him. Not her. There is no place here for anyone to physically punish a child. This is Wales.
We don't do that in Wales.
Physical punishment of children is illegal in Wales. To find out more, visit gov.wales/end physical punishment.
Thanks, everyone. Hope that gives you a flavour of the sort of comms work we've been doing. Moving on now, we're also working with our refugee and asylum colleagues to provide information to those that are new to Wales, so they're also aware of the law. And we've been developing training for professionals who work with and support families and children. We're about to roll out guidance on how to teach children and young people about the law in an appropriate and sensitive manner. Going forward, the Act that we passed requires us to publish 3- and 5-year post-implementation reviews. These will monitor the impact on public services, awareness and changes in attitudes, and stakeholder views and experiences. Our local authorities, police and the Crown Prosecution Service are collecting data to help us measure the impact of the legislation. We're also undertaking annual surveys to track public awareness and attitudes, and we'll be speaking to frontline professionals to get their views. The outcome of the review will inform any further work that might be needed to support implementation, as well as considering the broader implications of the change in the law. In all, By the time we complete the reviews, our journey will have taken nearly 10 years. We are really pleased that levels of awareness in the law in Wales remain high. It has been heartening to see that over 2/3 of those with caring responsibilities for children under 7 do not see any justification for physically punishing a child and are supportive of the law. This is a clear indication that we have turned a corner in Wales. But our work is ongoing, and I hope that you will follow our progress as we continue on our journey. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Joanne. So inspiring to hear about the comprehensive and sustained approach, and I would also say very positive approach to ending corporal punishment of children in Wales. And it's really heartening to see that 10 years of work has really resulted in very important change for children. Okay, I think we are now moving on to our final country example, and looking forward to hearing from speakers from Zambia.
Yeah, let me just quickly share my screen. Just a second.
So we have Kutonga Mwamsa, Child Protection Technical Specialist, Debbie Kangombe, Project Manager at Save the Children Zambia, and Mathilde Schilling, Safeguarding Behavioural Science Specialist, all at Save the Children. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll allow Matilda to just share the screen.
Can you see the screen?
Okay, thank you so much, Matilda. Just the next slide, please. Yeah, so basically we're just going to do a very quick introduction, but also a policy and legislative framework on safeguarding, just to also show some of the work that Save the Children and the rest of CSOs have been doing, just to push that, ensuring that there's available legislation to ensure that children are protected from corporal punishment. Then we are going to just demonstrate how we have actually been able to move forward from just not having the law, but ensuring that that is put into practice. Then Matilda, I think we'll wrap up just to showcase some of our things going forward in terms of applying a behavioral science to ensure that even as we engage on preventative initiatives, we are able to do that. Next slide, please. So just to provide some background, in Zambia, we did a survey, what we are calling the Young Voices Survey, where we were engaging children in schools and those out of school, just to have an understanding in terms of what the issues are. So interestingly, we got 75% of children reporting that they were either slapped, pinched, or hit by a teacher, or even use of other language that would affect their emotional being. Then also, we do know that learners do experience some violence on the way to school, or either way along the way. But also we do know that corporal punishment is being used to ensure that it's a measure to regulate behavior of children within schools. Next slide, please. So having looked at all that, civil society organizations in Zambia, NGOs, working together, we've been trying to push for ensuring that we have a very strong legislative framework to be able to protect children. So as at 2022, we had an act of parliament that pushed to ensure that children are protected through the Child Code Bill, which came into action in 2022, which among critical things really look at ensuring that children are protected from all forms of settings within the school and other environments. I'll allow my colleague Debbie to pick it up from here, then I'll pick it up later on. Debbie, over to you.
Thanks, Katongo. And Matilda, I'll just pick up from around the work that we did around the Children's Code Act, which came into effect in 2002. So what the code did was to codify all child-related legislation, and it domesticated the laws to international and regional standards in line with the UNCRC and the African Charter on the Rights and the Welfare of Children. Also, what the Children's Code Act did is to effectively ban corporal punishments in all settings in the country, and this is inclusive of the home setting. Matilda, if you could just go back to the previous slide, please. So from the Children's Code, this gave us a basis to do the work that Katongo will speak in detail to. In part of the sections of the Children's Code Act, I think this is section 22, this is where you will find the code specifically speaking to the abolishment of corporal punishment, but also looking at the section 276, which sets out and guides institutions to ensure that all institutions that work with children put in safeguarding measures in the work that they do. This means that all institutions that work with children through the code are mandated to develop safeguarding and protection procedures to prevent violence against children and child rights abuse. We can move to the next slide, please. So with this in mind, Save the Children worked with the government, the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services, to develop a national child safeguarding frameworks, which is an overarching framework for implementing safeguarding standards in institutions, guiding all state and non-state actors on how they need to work with children based on the recommendations from the Children's Code Act to ensure that all institutions working with children have safeguarding procedures. From the safeguarding framework, Save the Children worked with the Ministry of Education to develop sector-specific guidelines in the schools. The sector guidelines focused on guiding the behaviors of teachers at the school level. They also focus on institutionalization of safeguarding and corporal punishment abolishment. So essentially enforcing the abolishment of corporal punishment in schools through the sector guidelines. They also focus on building a protective and supportive environment in and around the schools that respect and value the protection of children. We can move to the next slide. So using that safeguarding legal and policy environment, we did a lot of work with the Ministry of Education, and at this point, I'll allow Katongo to speak to how we worked with that background to actualize safeguarding in schools and work with teachers, community, as well as pupils. I heard from colleagues earlier who talked about ensuring that there's awareness of the laws to ensure that they're effective, working with different actors and sectors at various levels of society for this work to begin to show results. Over to you, Katongo, and thanks.
Thank you so much, Debbie. So basically, we built on the socio-ecological model just to ensure that as a starting point, we focus on the learners just to ensure that there's ongoing awareness around positive behaviors, but also to ensure that there is that inbuilt relationship that is built between themselves and the teachers. Secondly, we also worked on the other pillar around the communities, ensuring that the school and communities also are aware, just to ensure that in as much as the learners would be able to conform to some of the behaviors or some of the practices also communities are aware, so that we have a balance in between the schools and communities, just to ensure that there's that positive relationship, and ensuring that even as we engage with the teachers, there's that collective promotion of children's rights, but also to ensure that even children themselves understand their rights as well as responsibilities. So just to ensure that we build that on one end. But also what has been critical is also to ensure that we target teachers in terms of ensuring that there's that capacity building, to ensure that there's that responsiveness around ensuring that they are cognizant of the fact that they need to behave, or they need to ensure that they need to put in place measures to promote relationships that would be able to also build in children. But by and large, it was all around picking it up from the legislative framework, just to ensure that even as we focus on that, there's that emphasis on ensuring that teachers are able to promote safeguarding within the schools. Next slide, please. Yeah, so by and large, one of the key things that we've been able to do is to focus on, first of all, teachers. I talked about teachers in the previous slide, to implement a module that we call positive discipline in everyday parenting, which really focuses on ensuring that it builds on ensuring that children, first of all, are respected, but also their well-being is protected by teachers, but also to ensuring that you develop a pathway with children to ensure that there's that long-term desire to ensure that children are protected, they are cared for, but also to ensure that even as they are disciplining children, they apply the basic services to ensure that children well taken care of without using physical and humiliating punishment at all costs. But also ensuring that also the second aspect, which has been very critical, also is to ensure that we work with communities, working with parent-teachers committees, to just ensure that they promote that social behavior that is critical to ensuring that within the school, within the home environment, children are not abused in any way or use any physical and humiliating punishment. But also critical is to ensure that children are protected at so ever, just to ensure that there is no harm that is done to them. But also if they face any form of abuse, they're able, first of all, to identify abuse, be able to report, but also being able to understand relevant reporting mechanisms. Next slide, please. At this point, I'll hand over to my colleague, Matilda, to take it up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katango. And yeah, I'm just briefly going to talk a little bit about how the global safeguarding team at Save the Children is going to apply behavioral science to develop more targeted safeguarding prevention initiatives. So as Katango and Debbie just gave a great example of, SEI continues to work on initiatives to combat corporal punishment through advocacy, safeguarding, child protection initiatives. But despite this, when we look at the safeguarding reporting data, we can see that corporal punishment, especially in education programs, continues to be one of the most common safeguarding concerns that are reported to Save the Children International. So while these reports tells us that corporal punishment is a problem, we still expect that given the reach we have on children in these education programs, we still expect that the problem remains quite heavily underreported. So what we intend to do is that the global safeguarding team will work with our Zambia colleagues to develop some more targeted safeguarding prevention initiatives and really leverage that existing progress made by the Zambia country office and the Ministry of Education in Zambia, and really enforce that newly enacted safeguarding framework. So we are planning to do that through 2 different angles and focus on 2 different things by applying a behavioral science lens. So the first angle is really understanding the underlying drivers of corporal punishment and proactively develop strategies to reduce corporal punishment to keep children safe in school. The other angle is to really improve and rethink reporting mechanisms in education to ensure that they're effective, accessible, and child-friendly. We really want to increase transparency and be able to better respond to concerns of abuse by identifying these like root causes of why it's really happening, so that we can prevent harm to children. So the approach that we're going to take is a diagnostic behavioral science approach, in this case, the TEST framework. And applying a diagnostic approach will really help us understand the underlying drivers of the target behaviors and be able to really match and target the solutions with the key barriers that we identify. So in the target and the explore phase, we plan to gather evidence by conducting formative research with students, teachers, ministries, and communities and other relevant stakeholders, as well as analyzing and utilizing the safeguarding reporting data that we have to understand the risks and the patterns regarding corporal punishment and reporting mechanisms. And in the solution phase, we then plan to develop corresponding solutions that really addresses and matches the key behavioral barriers and levers by co-creating with teachers, students, and community members. And then in the trial phase, we plan to test the solutions that we develop through experimental approaches and iterate before scaling. And while Zambia is a really great country to pilot this in, given the great progress that's already been made, we believe that there is a great potential for scaling and contextualizing successful interventions beyond Zambia, and then implemented across SCI's global education portfolio and through national mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you, Save the Children team. Yeah, thank you so much for all that very interesting presentation. We heard about the Save the Children's global safeguarding team strategy to ensure that we end corporal punishment in Zambia, since we now have the legislation in place, prohibiting legislation. Also, we heard about the safeguarding framework of Save the Children to ensure that violence against children and even corporal punishment is eliminated from schools, and promoting positive discipline and positive relations among students. So this is great, and again, we're going to share it with our network and participants to this webinar. Initially, we had planned to have another session of questions and answers, but it looks like we don't have enough time. Best, should we maybe ask each participant maybe to share some views, and then we directly have Steve Miller from Save the Children to close the session? Yeah, so maybe someone wants to say something from the team, one of the speakers, maybe Zambia wants to add something, Nepal. We have questions, but we're a bit worried that we run out of time. So if there are no questions, yeah.
Thank you so much. Can I come in?
Yes.
So in terms of one of our critical aspects is capacity building of the education sector, to just ensure that the teachers themselves are able to ensure that even as they apply positive discipline measures, they're able to apply that warmth and ensuring that there is that positive relationship that is being able to build. So one of the key entry points is also to work within the education sector for sustainability, just to ensure that even as we engage with the teachers, they are able to work within their curriculum or professional development sector, just to ensure that the teachers are able to get the learning that we are getting from the aspect of ensuring that we do not ensure that we don't bring in things that we are putting up structures, but working to within structures that are within the Ministry of Education, just to ensure that safeguarding aspect is promoted.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have hands up. Dan from Nepal.
Thank you very much, Sonia.
Mm-hmm.
A very quick one, a quick addition. Another lesson that we learned is that it's important to supplement parenting programs with a place where children can report cases of violence. So in the schools, for example, all the schools where we've been able to work, we've been able to set up suggestion boxes, which are anonymous. You could always report issues of bullying in school and among other things. And also at the community level, we support a few hotlines for children, the child helpline, where children can call and report as well. So it's really important to give children a voice also to be able to talk about issues that are affecting them. Thanks. Back to you, Sonia.
Thank you, Dan. We have 1 minute, literally 1 minute for you, Kirunda. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think for me, in a minute, I would want to really underline and underscore the importance of all actors in the civil society, in the government, understanding the role of the community as the actual implementers of change. The moment we understand that and design for that, then whatever interventions that we're planning to, test and implement will be successful. One of the pitfalls, is that most of us want to be in the space, yet the change is created by the change. The people who need the change most are the actual implementers. So I hope that maybe moving forward, we're able to have that lens. It will go a long way in creating lasting impact.
Thank you. Bess, over to you. We can't hear you clearly. Yes.
Oh, can you hear me now?
A bit better. Yes.
All right. I will just hand over to Steve Miller, our final speaker. Steve is Global Director of Child Protection at Save the Children International. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Bess, and I'll have us finished in a couple of minutes. My name is Steve Miller. I am the Director of Child Protection at Save the Children, but I'm also a South African. And this weekend, we celebrated Freedom Day here, 27th of April. It's been 30 years since our transition to democracy. And one of the first things that Nelson Mandela did back then was to ban corporal punishment in schools for what it represented and how it was used during the apartheid years. It took us another 20 years in South Africa to ban it in the home through a constitutional court decision. And now, like many other countries, we are on a long journey to raise awareness of the law, provide public education on positive discipline, and to monitor the changes. And this type of peer-to-peer learning that we've had today is critical. I would like to thank all the speakers at the webinar. Feel free to do a virtual clap if you like, for their powerful and inspirational interventions. Etienne, Stephen, Ramadan, Joan, Dan, Joanne, Katengo, Debbie, and Matilda for sharing your invaluable experience on laws and their implementation, attitudes and behavior change strategies, and the critical role of child protection in and around schools. They have been challenging not just the most prevalent category of violence against children, but the whole idea that some arbitrary degree of violence against children should uniquely be legal and socially approved. This is as fundamental as anything can be to improving children's status. As we prepare to mark the International Day to End All Corporal Punishment of Children tomorrow, and during a year in which we will convene the first ever ministerial conference to end violence against children, we must recognize that children need more, not less, protection from being hit and hurt. And so, in order to keep our 2030 promise to children in the SDGs, all states must prohibit all corporal punishment of children in all settings by 2030. All states should commit to implementing a national action plan that includes public education campaigns, positive parenting support, promotion of safe schools and communities, professional training, and more. And finally, all states should commit to measuring progress by including SDG indicator 16.2.1 in national statistical programs. Nelson Mandela knew well the consequences of corporal punishment on individual children, and this adds up to negative effects on society as a whole. And so he took action to end it. Experience shows that when we act to end violence against children, we can change individuals and society's acceptance and use of violence. This is a critical year for EVAC, and all of us here today can take action by speaking up, posting on social media tomorrow, and in the run-up to the ministerial conference. Thank you once again to our amazing organizers, Bess and Sonia, to the speakers, and to all of you for attending and spending time with us today. I hope you found it illuminating. Goodbye.
Thank you. So we will end on these very powerful remarks from Steve. We thank you all, Bess and I, and then we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.